Over the last few weeks, you will have seen the chaos in some of our cities. In Joburg, the DA's Mpho Palatse lost control of the city, was then reinstated, could now be out of office again soon. In Ekurhuleni, the DA's Tanya Campbell was removed last week. It looks like the ANC's Mzondile Masine may well be elected mayor again this week. This kind of turmoil may well have a big impact on the way cities are managed. The SA Cities Network just published a State of the City Finance Report. Danga is the Programme Manager for Well-Governed Cities at the South African Cities Network. Danga, good afternoon to you. If you look at the finances of cities, what's been affecting those finances over the last decade or so?
Thank you for the opportunity. Well, our report actually takes a look at the last decade, as you say, and we look specifically at the two local government terms that were within that decade. So the first up to 2016 and then the next up to 2021. And we start by looking at, first of all, just the picture within which the macroeconomy within which cities operate, and identify a number of external shocks that cities had no control over and which affected their finances. So, of course, there's the global economic slowdown since 2008, which still is ongoing and has been worsened by the war in Ukraine. We also look at COVID, clearly, is something that has had a massive impact around the world and clearly has also affected the way in which cities operate, but also climate impacts. And we have seen both in terms of the droughts that Cape Town faced a few years ago, the coastal cities such as Nelson Mandela Bay and Buffalo City are facing right now, but also the impact of floods as well, as we saw in eThekwini a few months ago. So we look at all those elements and how they affect municipal finances, in addition to some of the choices that cities have more control over, such as their budgets.
We know that generally what's called the on-selling of the electricity, councils buy electricity from Eskom, they on-sell it to you and I, and they charge you for that, is usually the biggest source of revenue for cities. When you have load-shedding, when you have so many problems with electricity provision, when you have people not paying for electricity, what impact's that had on cities' finances?
Well, it's had a massive impact, to put it mildly. As you've indicated, a large part of the city revenue model is predicated on selling on electricity to residents and consumers, like businesses within city limits. So when cities buy electricity from Eskom, they then expect to sell that electricity on and take a certain percentage that they then use to both fund that electricity, but also to cross-subsidize the use of electricity by customers with lower incomes who cannot afford that. So when Eskom itself is not even providing electricity that cities can buy, you can imagine that has a massive knock-on effect in the fact that the city then doesn't have electricity it can sell, and therefore a large part of its revenue is no longer able to make. Of course, we as consumers feel it in the sense of being in the dark, but that has a big implication for city finances. But also at the same time, though, that lack of electricity has an effect on two things. Some businesses are eventually forced to close because they simply cannot continue to operate as a result of those electricity interruptions. So that's a group of customers who then are no longer part of the revenue base of the city, even if the city is restored. But then also the broader economy is affected by power cuts and the lack of intermittent supply of electricity from Eskom. And one of the most important things that we find in this state of city finances is that the state of the economy itself is one of the biggest predictors of how stable city finances will be, because if businesses are flourishing, if they're able to employ people, then those residents are incentivized to both buy homes, to buy electricity, to buy water. The businesses themselves, of course, buy all of those things as well. So a thriving economy really leads to a thriving city.
We have councils changing hands. I mean, I can't tell you who the mayor in Ekurhuleni will be by the end of this week, and I can't tell you which party will be in power in Joburg at the end of next week. That must have an impact too.
Oh yes, very much so. And in fact, we do find, and this report shows, that the correlation, or rather the relationship between the length of time that a city CFO and a city manager is in office is very strongly related to the financial performance of that city. So the longer a city financial officer or a municipal manager is in office in a big city, the more likely that the city's financial performance will be good. And so the flip side of that, as you're talking to now, is that when you have a situation of instability, when there's political instability, it has a knock-on effect onto the administration itself, primarily through the effect on the relationships between the city manager and their senior management and the politicians to whom they are accountable. But then that has a knock-on effect further down the administration. So if your boss is in an unstable situation, doesn't know what direction they're going to be pulled in based on the political mandate that the politicians give them, then that also sort of stalls the administration itself. And just generally, as all of us know, a creation of a culture of instability in any organization, not just a city but anywhere, limits the ability of people to do their work. And so that is a major predictor. In other words, political instability is a major predictor of financial instability and lack of sustainable finances within a city.
We have, at the same time, allied with this sort of instability in councils, if we can use that word, is coalitions, where you have more than one party. It makes it harder, I'm sure, to make decisions. And, dare I say it, Danga, it also, perhaps, encourages patronage. What does that do?
Well, yes, that's one of the things we do point out in our report, that the elephant in the room, if you will, is corruption in the local sphere. We speak about state capture at the national level, and indeed there's a lot of reporting about that. But the president himself, speaking at the local government summit recently, also spoke about the capture of the state at the local level. Political parties are not businesses, so they do need money to operate, and it's no secret that across all parties there are various means in which the supply chain management process perhaps is used in a way for people who are favorable to political parties to then make donations to those political parties that fund their activities, which is something that, clearly then is a reason why there's such an incentive for parties to be within office and to have a seat at the table, if you will.
I've got to tell you, Danga, it can feel sometimes that our cities are going just one way, that Joburg's going to be like Nelson Mandela Bay. I don't know if that's true, but do you see it like that? It seems almost inevitable that this kind of instability is going to have a big impact and that this kind of instability is going to be around for a while. Or could things actually move in the other direction? Please, give me some optimism.
Yes, well, I think the first thing to say is that, our cities are going concerns, and I think we've had this conversation in the past as well. So they are going concerns, and this is speaking purely for our big cities, our metros. The instability issue is one, I think, that will just work itself out over time. I think we often speak of other countries where there are, in fact, unstable governments that come and go, but it's a learning process, I suppose, as those processes are institutionalized, as parties become better at negotiating coalition agreements and better at managing them, then perhaps that stability will return. But the most important things, and one of the recommendations that we make in the report, is that actually the growth of the national economy is actually the most important predictor of how our cities will do. So if we can get our economies growing again, as I mentioned before, which means that therefore businesses grow, that businesses employ more people, therefore residents will pay their bills, businesses will be buying electricity and water from the city, and then the city's finances will be in a healthy state. The other thing is definitely to sanitize this political administrative interface, as we call it. And there are positive signs that when you do in fact have a political party or a coalition that understands the importance of stability, then that message can be communicated through, and you would hope therefore that they then work towards doing that. But then also finally, we do see slippers of hope in the sense that cities are in fact great magnets of opportunity, and they're administrators within cities themselves who are dedicated and hardworking and are willing to do the work that it takes to make cities pleasant, inclusive, productive places for us to live in. And it's all about, in many cases, us allowing them to just get on and do that job and not distract them with all the politics that seems to be happening around them.
Danga Mughogho, thank you very much indeed. Program Manager for Well Governed Cities of the South African Cities Network. Really appreciate the time.